the Ukraine situation. So Russian, like you mentioned, that Vitkov was in Moscow and they were talking, but there is no deal, peace
No.
deal. And so what's next? Are they going to
Well,
continue to talk?
the Russians said that there's no peace deal because there's no peace proposal. They've just been given a whole set of 28 points, which they don't really know what to make of. And apparently, there's they said yesterday that when Witkoff and Kushner turned up in Moscow, they came along with this paper with the 28 points. And then they came up with 4 other papers as well, some of which completely contradict each other. So there's this mess of papers and documents and ideas. And the Russians have said, look, okay, we've seen all of this. Some of this is good, some of this is bad, some of this is absolutely terrible. We can talk about some things, we can absolutely reject others. But obviously, there's no proposal we can accept here.
Mhm.
What we need to do is conduct a proper negotiation with proper negotiating teams so that we can sit down and work this thing through.
Mhm.
Now, I don't know whether Trump is interested in anything like that. I don't know whether Kushner and Witkoff are the sort of people really
Mhm.
to conduct that kind of thing. But that's what the Russians said. I don't think we're any further forward at all, actually.
And in the meantime, I also wonder, what do you think of this scandal around Zelensky, his chief of staff,
Mm.
Andrea Yermak? He
Yeah,
resigned, even though
yeah.
I don't think he's named in this scandal. Now, my question is this: now, Ukraine has been a very corrupted country. That's no news, right? So, and we know Zelensky has some problems. But why does it become such a big deal now? Is it Trump's way or people around Trump to put pressure on him to
It,
accept the
it,
peace deal?
it may be that is a widely held view, and it is a plausible one because the investigative agencies that are involved in these investigations, there's 2 of them. One is called NABU, and the other is called SAPO. These are
Okay.
Ukrainian names, which I'm
Uh-huh.
discuss what they are, but they're investigative agencies. They were set up by the United States back in 2014, and
Uh-huh.
they were funded by the United States to investigate corruption. Now, in 14 years, they've achieved nothing, except suddenly they've now been activated. Now, paradoxically, they're not funded directly by the United States anymore. They're funded, in fact, by the European Union.
Mhm.
But it's likely that the US still controls them or has some control over them. But the other thing to say about these corruption investigations is, yes, it's quite likely the Americans are involved. It's quite likely that Zelensky's political opponents in
Mhm.
Kiev are also involved. Yermak, who, as you rightly said, is not yet directly implicated in any of this, was targeted because he was Zelensky's right hand man, and the intention was to weaken Zelensky. Um, the reason this is happening now is because on the battlefronts, things are falling apart.
Mhm.
Pakrovsk has fallen, Kupiansk has fallen, the Russians are advancing faster and faster. The Ukrainian army is crumbling. Reuters did a survey of 11 Ukrainian soldiers who joined the Ukrainian army earlier this year. All 11 are either dead or wounded or deserted.
Mhm.
None of them is in the battle in the army anymore. So, I mean, you get a sense of a crisis developing. And in this crisis, all sorts of things happen. People start to maneuver and try to take
Mhm.
control, and panic grows. And the Americans perhaps also trying to get the negotiations kick-started so that they can get some kind of deal with the Russians before everything collapses. And that's probably why these corruption investigations are taking place.
Well, in that case, if I were Russian, I would more inclined not to sign any peace agreement because I'm winning in the battleground. Why do I stop now?
You know,
Right?
it's very interesting you say that because Putin actually addressed that very question. And there was a meeting some days ago in Moscow in
Mhm.
which he said, look, we've received all this is before the meeting that took place with the Americans yesterday. But he said, look, we've been shown these 28 points.
Mhm.
We know that there are others, but at that time they didn't know what they were. And he said, look, some of these things are clearly unacceptable. Some of them might be things we can talk about with the Americans. We would prefer to just go on fighting
Yeah.
and win the war because um, we're winning the war.
Mhm.
And why shouldn't we? But we are prepared to negotiate, and we're doing this for two reasons. Firstly, because we're civilized people.
Mhm.
And if we can achieve our objectives by peaceful means, of course, we will do so. And of course, by doing so, we will save the lives of our soldiers. But secondly, I've had conversations with our friends and allies around the world, and I spoke to all of the leaders of all our countries, all the friendly countries, and they've all made it clear to me that they want negotiations to take place. Now, I'm not reproducing Putin's words. I'm inserting into them some of my interpretation of these words, but I have followed Putin very closely, and I have no doubt that this interpretation is correct. One of those friendly countries, by the way, is China,
Mhm.
obviously.
Mhm.
So Putin said, we're civilized people, but we also have our friends around the world. They want us to negotiate. And that's exactly right. I think China has always wanted to try
Mhm.
and see a negotiated resolution of this conflict. And the Russians take that into account. So they're not going to compromise, they're not going to throw away their victory,
Mhm.
but at the same time, they're not going to shut the door on negotiations for the two reasons I've said.
Mhm. By the way, what you talked about the Ukrainian organization who are supposedly independently investigate corruption. Um, these again, I think both in Japan and in Korea, they have those organizations too, but they're always
Mm.
controlled by the US. So it's
Yeah,
almost like not almost, it is a tool for the US
yeah.
to control the local officials, right? Make sure they're
I
in line.
didn't. I didn't know that they existed in South
Yeah.
Korea and the US. Well, that tells you who controls these countries.
Yeah. Because if you're not doing things according to what the US wants, they can always launch some kind of investigation, right?
Yes,
Whether it's
yes.
true or not, they can.
And Japan, by the way, is riddled with corruption.
Hmm.
Just to
Hmm.
say,
Yeah. Hmm. Yeah. Speaking of corruption, there is a big scandal in Philippines,
yeah,
flood fund scandal.
yeah.
The whole fund is like $9.8 billion, so it's a huge amount of money. But the flood this year is worse than
Yes.
ever. That doesn't seem like
Wow.
the government has done anything. So it turns
Mm,
out the money is missing, and they are investigating a guy called Zaldi Call, who is a contractor. He is now in hiding because there is somebody issued a arrest warrant for him. But he, through his some channel, he said Marcos Jr., his executive, his son, his cousin, they were all somehow involved. So there's a huge scandal going on. My question is this: Marcos' family, his parents were deeply corrupted. The
yeah.
Philippine people should know that. Why did they vote for him in the first place?
I have no idea. I mean, I find that extraordinary, actually. I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, Marcos's corruption, Marcos Senior's corruption
Mhm. Yeah,
was notorious around the world.
yeah,
So, why people in the Philippines should have thought that the son would be any different?
yeah.
I cannot for the life of me understand. I mean, it was obvious. I mean, we heard about Imelda Marcos,
Uh-huh.
Marcos's wife, and her vast collection of shoes. That's the kind of family that the younger Marcos has come from.
Yeah.
I can only presume that elections in the Philippines are conducted in a very strange way and that they're, at least in part, run by the United States.
Yeah. And these countries, they all have some families. It seems like a very
Mm.
established families, and the
Yes,
elections almost always happen between families, right? So
yes.
it doesn't matter what the family's done in the past. You have the big name, of course, you have the resource, and then voters just you pick which family.
Yeah, which
Like,
is exactly the same in Greece, by the way.
okay.
And one of the reasons I don't live in Greece is because I belong to one of those families,
Mhm.
and I wanted to opt out of that system. Just to
Okay.
say, mm,
Well, it's actually pretty common. I think Pakistan is a little bit like that too.
yeah,
There's
it is
some,
absolutely
yeah,
it is.
yeah.
Absolutely is. And of course, corruption is absolutely essential part of that system
Uh-huh.
because what these families do is that they're basically clans.
Uh-huh.
And once they gain power, they distribute favors to the people who supported them in order to
Yeah.
gain power.
Yeah. Yeah, and India also I think have some families also.
Very
Yeah.
much so. Very
Yeah.
much so.